You see, it all begins in a time when the United States was a very different place, a sprawling, often untamed landscape, a nation of promise, of opportunity, but also of peril. Picture, if you will, the rolling plains of Missouri in the early 1840s. The air is still, the sunlight soft, and you can almost hear the distant rustle of prairie grasses in the wind, as families, full of hope and, perhaps, a touch of naive optimism, gather their possessions for a journey, one that would stretch for months and challenge their very endurance. The Oregon Trail, as it would come to be known, was not just a path across land, it was a tapestry of human ambition, dreams, and, occasionally, stark miscalculations. Imagine yourself standing on the edge of your homestead, the scent of earth and livestock heavy in the morning air, your wagon packed with food, blankets, tools, perhaps even a treasured piano, or a few books for comfort on long, lonely evenings, and beyond the horizon, a road unrolling into uncertainty. This was the reality for thousands of emigrants who, with courage and, sometimes folly, decided that heading west was worth the risk. You might wonder why anyone would leave the relative familiarity of the settled East. Why abandon the comfort of a small town, the friends, the neighbors, the church, the predictable rhythms of life, for months of dust, cold, and rain? Why, indeed? Well, in part, it was the promise of fertile land in Oregon, free for the taking, the hope of a new beginning, a fresh start, far from economic difficulties, disease, or even social constraints. And so, the trail became a magnet for ambition, for adventure, and, as it turned out, for human error as well. The beginning of the trail itself was, by today's standards, deceptively simple. You leave Independence, Missouri, the jumping-off point, as people called it, families in wagons, oxen or mules yoked and ready, the chatter of children, the anxious voices of mothers, the worn but determined expressions of fathers, all layered over the lowing of cattle and the creaking of wagon wheels, a symphony of anticipation and, sometimes, dread. You can almost feel the tension in the air, that strange mixture of hope and apprehension, as everyone sets off, thinking, perhaps, that the next 1,000 miles will be as orderly as the last few days of packing. Of course, the landscape that greeted these travelers was anything but orderly. First, the Missouri River, a gentle, flowing companion at the trail's start, promising easy passage and steady water, but already hinting at challenges. You must ford the river, and here, even experienced travelers could falter. Oxen might slip, wagons might become stuck, and a young child's cry or the anxious shout of a father could ripple across the water, a small omen of the difficulties ahead. And so, your journey begins, with small victories and minor disasters, none of which, in retrospect, seem sufficient to prepare anyone for what lies beyond the horizon. As the trail continues westward, the terrain gradually shifts, from gentle prairies dotted with wildflowers and occasional groves of trees, to more challenging expanses, the vast open plains, where the sky seems infinite, stretching endlessly above, and the heat of summer can bake the earth beneath your feet, or the bitter chill of early spring nights can freeze your bones. You, as the traveler, are constantly negotiating with nature, learning that the river that appears serene might suddenly swell, that a grass fire can consume months of careful preparation, that even the most well-fed oxen have their limits. And yet, people persisted. It is remarkable, really, how human ambition can blind us to obvious difficulties. Imagine families, carrying more than just possessions, carrying hope, perhaps even stubborn pride, and every time the trail grew difficult, they pressed onward. You can almost hear the creak of the wheels in the quiet of the evening, punctuated by the occasional laugh, the whispered admonishment of a parent, the plaintive whinny of a horse, all echoing across a landscape that, to this day, seems almost infinite in its openness. You might, at this point, begin to question the wisdom of the journey. And indeed, many settlers did. Letters from home, when they reached towns along the trail, often described the journey as grueling, as exhausting, as occasionally futile. Diseases, like cholera, began to spread quietly, and yet people moved on, drawn by dreams that were, in some cases, unrealistically grand. One can almost see the subtle humor in hindsight, the absurdity of taking your entire life's possessions across a continent, into the unknown, relying on oxen that may tire, rivers that may rise, and weather that may turn against you, all for the chance at land that, while fertile, was not, and could never be, guaranteed. The pace of travel was slow, agonizingly slow, in fact. You would cover perhaps 15 miles a day, if fortune and the elements were kind, sometimes less. You, walking beside your wagon, might notice the details of the land, the pattern of clouds, the tracks of buffalo, the small prairie flowers that bloom resiliently, perhaps even the distant outline of mountains, growing ever larger as you approach them, a reminder that your journey is not just long, but increasingly arduous. And in the evenings, when the campfires are lit, the settlers would gather, exchange stories, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with quiet tears, and above it all, the stars would wheel overhead, infinite and impassive, a silent witness to human determination and, occasionally, folly. Food, too, was a constant concern. Families carried what they could: flour, salted meats, dried beans, small comforts for the long road ahead. And yet, preservation was imperfect, and spoilage common. You might imagine the quiet despair of opening a flour sack to find it crawling with weevils, or discovering that the meat has gone sour, small crises that, cumulatively, could sap morale. Water, though seemingly plentiful in rivers and streams, was sometimes contaminated, a minor misstep leading to illness, which, in the close quarters of a wagon train, could spread rapidly. You begin to sense, perhaps, that the trail was not merely long, it was relentless in testing human patience, ingenuity, and endurance. And there was the weather. The weather. Sudden storms could drench a wagon train, soaking clothing, blankets, and supplies, sometimes washing away carefully stored provisions in muddy torrents. The sun, when not obscured by clouds, could beat down mercilessly, turning dust into choking clouds, and rendering even the simplest tasks exhausting. Nights might bring frost, or bitter winds that whistle through the canvas of the wagons, leaving travelers shivering under thin blankets, always hoping that morning brings something gentler, something forgiving. Yet, despite all these challenges, there was camaraderie, and sometimes, a quiet joy. The travelers, moving slowly together, shared meals, stories, and a certain respect for one another, recognizing that survival often depended as much on cooperation as on skill or luck. And in those moments, you might feel the faint thrill of adventure, the pride of accomplishment, though, as we will see, these small pleasures are often overshadowed by the immense difficulties of the trail itself. It is important to note, and you may appreciate this as you reflect on the settlers' choices, that the Oregon Trail was not a single, simple path. It was a network of routes, often poorly marked, stretching over 2,000 miles, from Missouri to the Willamette Valley in Oregon, passing through rivers, plains, mountains, and deserts. Maps were sometimes inaccurate, guides sometimes overconfident, and every mile presented new questions: which fork of a river to take? Which pass through a mountain range would be safest? Should you push onward in a storm, or hunker down and wait, risking dwindling supplies? Each decision, seemingly small at the moment, could have life-altering consequences. And so, as the sun sets over the prairie, casting long shadows across wagons and oxen, you feel the quiet tension of anticipation mixed with anxiety, the gentle rhythm of wheels on dirt, the lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind in the grasses, and you begin to understand why the Oregon Trail, while celebrated in storybooks and songs, was, in truth, a perilous undertaking. The path promised land, opportunity, and a new beginning, but it demanded endurance, patience, and, occasionally, the quiet acceptance of loss. By the time travelers reached the more treacherous sections, rivers, mountains, and deserts, the trail's true character emerged, an unyielding series of challenges that tested not only physical strength but the limits of hope itself. It is here, at the threshold of real hardship, that we pause, letting the scene settle, imagining ourselves among the settlers, feeling the dust on our boots, the ache in our shoulders, the uncertainty of each step, and understanding, gently, why the Oregon Trail might not have been the most sensible choice, after all. And now, as the first light of dawn touches the prairie once more, we prepare to follow these families further along the trail, to meet the key figures, to witness their choices, their missteps, and, occasionally, their triumphs. For now, breathe in the vastness of the plains, the quiet anticipation of a journey begun, and let the soft rhythm of wheels, wind, and wandering hearts carry you forward, into the story that is both cautionary and endlessly human. As you continue along the trail, imagine yourself now amidst the slowly moving wagons, the soft creak of wheels over packed dirt, the low murmur of conversation among families, the occasional call of a child asking for water, or a parent reminding another to mind the oxen. It is here that the journey truly begins, and the early optimism meets reality. You see, the settlers were not all strangers to hardship. Many had weathered the small storms of frontier life, tended to farms, and managed livestock. Yet, nothing quite prepares a family for weeks of continuous travel, in close quarters, with uncertain food and fickle weather, and so it was that even the most resilient found themselves tested. Consider, if you will, a family such as the Whitmans. Marcus and Narcissa, devout and determined, yet unprepared for the physical demands of such a trek. You walk beside them as they tend to their oxen, the animals heavy laden with supplies, and you hear the quiet sighs of exertion, the soft curses whispered under breath, and perhaps a gentle laugh as a child stumbles, then giggles, unaware of the distance yet to come. Their hopes are as high as the prairie grass, yet small difficulties already begin to hint at the trail's hidden perils. The trail itself is mercurial. Rivers appear, sometimes shallow and manageable, sometimes swollen with spring runoff. You follow along as families build makeshift ferries, guide wagons across muddy banks, and keep a watchful eye on children and livestock. One misstep, and a wagon wheel slips into the current, sending flour and blankets tumbling into the water. A small disaster, perhaps, but enough to cast a long shadow over morale. You feel the quiet weight of responsibility pressing on every adult, and the soft ache of sympathy for those who falter along the way. It is not just rivers that challenge the travelers. The terrain itself has moods, gentle rolling hills that suddenly steepen, stretches of prairie so flat and endless that the mind begins to wander, imagining dangers that may not exist, and then, the gradual rise of the Rocky Mountains, distant and imposing, their peaks dusted with snow, a constant reminder that human determination must meet not only physical obstacles, but the raw power of nature. You, walking alongside, sense the awe and trepidation mingled in every step. Daily life on the trail is a slow rhythm, punctuated by small crises. Families rise at dawn, tend to the oxen, pack supplies, prepare breakfast, usually beans or bread, perhaps dried meat, and set out on the day's journey. Dust rises around their feet as the wagons creak forward. You notice the simple ingenuity required, a broken wheel repaired with spare parts, a meal prepared over a small fire, water fetched from a sometimes murky stream. There is pride in these small victories, yet always a lingering shadow of uncertainty. Guides play a crucial role. Experienced men, often with knowledge of river crossings, mountain passes, and native trails, lead the wagons. Yet, even the guides cannot predict every difficulty. A wrong turn at a fork, a misjudged river crossing, or a delay in crossing a treacherous hill can cascade into a day, or week, of lost progress. You sense the subtle humor in hindsight, the grand map in one hand, the anxious glance at the river in the other, and the collective hope that all goes as planned. Encounters with Native Americans are often brief, sometimes tense, sometimes helpful. You walk alongside families as they trade goods, seek advice on terrain, and, occasionally, share stories across language barriers. In this quiet interlude, there is a lesson that survival is not just a matter of strength or supplies, but also of diplomacy, respect, and attentiveness. The trail is a world unto itself, where every interaction carries weight, and every decision, however small, may ripple forward in unexpected ways. Illness begins to make its subtle presence known. Cholera, dysentery, and other diseases lurk quietly, spreading among families living in close quarters. You notice a mother tending to a feverish child, a father keeping watch over a sick ox, and the soft murmur of other families exchanging remedies or comforting words. Each day carries the quiet anxiety that the next may bring illness or injury, yet life goes on, the wagons continue to roll, and the prairie stretches onward. By the second week, or perhaps the third, minor accidents occur with surprising frequency. Children stumble into mud, supplies spill, oxen bolt at the sudden cry of a bird. You begin to notice a pattern. No matter how carefully one plans, the trail has its own rhythm, its own surprises. And here, perhaps, the subtle humor emerges, the recognition that human foresight, while admirable, is often incomplete. As you move further along, you begin to meet other travelers. A young couple, nervous and uncertain, seeking fortune in fertile Oregon fields, a widower with a cart full of belongings, moving slowly but steadily, and small groups of friends who rely on one another for advice, support, and sometimes, gentle admonishment. These encounters provide a rhythm of social life on the trail, punctuating the otherwise relentless journey. You can almost hear the quiet conversations, the laughter that breaks through the dust, and the shared sighs when yet another river crossing proves more challenging than expected. Food shortages become a more pressing concern. Oxen require feeding, children require nourishment, and the limits of what can be carried become painfully apparent. You witness families rationing, improvising, sometimes going without. And yet, the human spirit, in small acts of creativity and stubbornness, finds a way. A few wild berries, a small stream fish, or an inventive recipe for dried beans can lift morale and sustain hope, if only temporarily. Evenings on the trail are a gentle respite, though never complete. Campfires glow softly in the dusk, oxen rest, children play quietly nearby, and adults check supplies, mend clothing, and discuss the day's decisions. There is a poetry in the ordinary, a quiet dignity in perseverance. You, standing among them, feel the rhythm of life in this transient world, the balance between hope and exhaustion, and the profound weight of each passing mile. By the end of this first significant stretch, the settlers begin to recognize patterns, the ways the trail will test them, the limitations of their preparations, and the small triumphs that sustain them. It is a gentle lesson in endurance, that success is measured not just in distance covered, but in resilience, in the ability to rise after setbacks, and in the quiet moments of human connection that make the journey bearable. And so, as the sun dips low over the prairie, casting a golden glow over wagons, oxen, and families alike, you feel the first true sense of accomplishment, but also the growing awareness that this journey, while filled with hope, is not without its costs. Each mile has its own story, each crossing its own challenge, and the trail, as we shall continue to see, is patient, unforgiving, and quietly instructive. By now, you, walking beside the wagon trains, begin to notice a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The first flush of excitement has softened, replaced by a quiet tension, the kind that settles into muscles and bones over long days of travel. You see it in the careful steps of the oxen, in the slow movements of exhausted children, in the quiet, patient expressions of parents who have long since ceased to hope for ease. And here, in these small moments, the trail begins to teach its harshest lessons. One of the earliest and most insidious companions of travelers is disease. Cholera, dysentery, and fever move silently among families, finding victims in the crowded wagons, near shared water sources, or along the long stretches of prairie where exhaustion has weakened the body. You might imagine a mother tending to a child with fever, the child's small body trembling, the mother's hands wet with sweat, as the father quietly scavenges for clean water, or attempts to find herbs or remedies passed down from distant homesteads. Every day carries the subtle risk of illness, and the trail does not pause for comfort. Food, too, becomes a persistent concern. What seemed ample at the start of the journey, flour, salted meat, dried beans, now begins to dwindle. You notice the settlers rationing carefully, measuring portions with exacting precision, sometimes too exacting, leaving hungry children to gnaw at small scraps or sharing only a few bites of bread among the family. The ingenuity of the human spirit shines in these moments. Wild berries are gathered, small fish are caught in streams, and occasionally, a brave traveler hunts game in the distance. Yet these measures, though noble, can never fully compensate for the relentless demands of months on the trail. Even the weather conspires to test endurance. Summer sun, once a gentle companion, now blisters the skin and turns dust into choking clouds. Rain, when it comes, is relentless, soaking clothing and blankets, softening the earth into sticky mud that slows wagons to a crawl. Nights bring frost that creeps into the wagon, chilling even the hardiest of travelers. You can almost feel the chill yourself, the slow seep of cold into bones, the dampness clinging to clothing, the quiet despair that grows as the days stretch long and unforgiving. Interactions with Native Americans become more frequent, as travelers seek guidance or trade for food. These encounters are, at times, harmonious, at times, tense. You witness the delicate diplomacy that settlers must exercise, small gifts, careful speech, respectful gestures, all aimed at ensuring safe passage. Yet misunderstandings are easy. A misread gesture or a sudden noise can spark conflict, reminding travelers that, despite good intentions, the world beyond familiar homesteads requires vigilance and respect. The terrain itself grows increasingly demanding. Plains give way to rolling hills, hills to more rugged foothills, and eventually, the formidable Rocky Mountains loom in the distance, snow-capped and unyielding. You walk beside families who strain to push wagons up steep inclines, the oxen panting and sweating, children clutching at ropes or hands, parents encouraging, cajoling, and occasionally scolding, all moving with painstaking care, knowing that one misstep could spell disaster. And then, there are the rivers. Rivers that seemed manageable at first, now swollen with spring runoff, dangerous and unpredictable. You watch as families build makeshift rafts, coax wagons across muddy banks, and sometimes, with heavy hearts, see possessions lost to the current. Flour sacks, blankets, small tools, all claimed by the water in moments that are both sudden and inevitable. Each crossing is a quiet negotiation with nature, a test of ingenuity and patience, and occasionally, a reminder of human fallibility. Daily life on the trail is a careful balance of labor and small comforts. You notice the settlers rising early, performing tasks with mechanical precision, cooking over small fires, tending to livestock, mending clothing, checking supplies. Each action is repeated day after day, with few variations, yet each day carries new challenges. Perhaps a wagon wheel breaks in the distance, or a sudden storm forces a campfire to be abandoned, small events, yet enough to shape the rhythm of life, to define the mood of the trail. Among the travelers, stories circulate. Tales of previous emigrants who perished from disease, accidents, or exhaustion, warnings whispered by those who have ventured further ahead, advice shared by guides who have learned the trail's subtle patterns. You feel the tension in these exchanges, the cautious respect for experience, and the quiet anxiety that lingers whenever a group prepares to move on, knowing that the next mile may bring the unexpected. Children, though resilient, are particularly vulnerable. You watch them play briefly during rest stops, chasing one another across meadows, laughing despite fatigue, yet you also see the quiet suffering when illness strikes, when food is insufficient, or when the monotony of travel becomes oppressive. Parents bear these burdens in silence, the weight of responsibility heavy on their shoulders, knowing that every decision, when to rest, which river crossing to attempt, how to ration food, could affect the lives of those most dear to them. Supplies, predictably, are another constant source of concern. Wagons carry everything necessary for survival, yet space is finite, and careful planning does not prevent spoilage, breakage, or loss. Axles snap, wheels crack, tools rust or vanish, and the settlers must improvise with ingenuity born of necessity. In these moments, you witness quiet triumphs of human adaptability, a wagon repaired with ingenuity, a meal stretched to feed an entire family, a camp organized to shelter both people and livestock from sudden storms. Amid all these challenges, the human spirit persists. You notice small acts of kindness, a neighbor sharing flour, a mother comforting another's child, a guide offering advice to those unfamiliar with a river ford. These moments, quiet and often fleeting, sustain hope and provide a fragile counterbalance to the relentless hardships of the trail. Yet, for all the courage and ingenuity displayed, the Oregon Trail continues to assert itself, patient, indifferent, and unyielding. And so, as the sun dips low in the western sky, casting long shadows over wagons, oxen, and weary travelers, you feel a growing sense of awareness, a quiet understanding of the trail's true nature. It is not merely a path to opportunity, it is a test of endurance, patience, and resilience, a slow, often unforgiving teacher. You begin to see why so many would later remark, with gentle irony, that the Oregon Trail was perhaps not the most sensible undertaking, despite the dreams and ambitions that carried them so far. And as night falls, the campfires flicker in the dusk, families settle for a brief rest, children sleep under blankets, and oxen huddle together for warmth, the quiet of the prairie enveloping all. You feel the rhythm of the trail, the interplay of hope, fatigue, and perseverance, and the gentle realization that, while the journey is physically exhausting, it is also quietly transformative. The Oregon Trail reveals both the fragility and the strength of those who dare to traverse it. As the settlers press onward, you begin to feel the growing weight of the trail's challenges. The initial excitement has long faded, replaced by a quiet endurance, a rhythm of slow, deliberate movement punctuated by the occasional crisis, and yet, the trail offers no pause. The rivers grow wider and swifter, the hills steeper, and the skies, unpredictable, swinging from blazing sun to sudden storms with alarming speed. Consider the Rocky Mountains, looming in the distance, their snow-capped peaks a constant reminder that the trail is neither kind nor forgiving. You watch families laboriously guiding wagons up narrow passes, oxen straining under heavy loads, children clutching ropes and parents' hands alike. Each step is deliberate, cautious, every misstep, potentially disastrous. And you, walking quietly beside them, sense the tension coiled in each movement, the silent prayers offered under breath, the restrained sighs of exhaustion, the subtle glance exchanged between travelers, communicating both worry and determination. River crossings become more perilous. Streams that seemed manageable in spring now surge with melted snow, currents strong enough to sweep away wagons or livestock. Families construct makeshift ferries from logs, ropes, and ingenuity, yet accidents still occur. A wagon may tip, sending supplies into the icy water, flour, blankets, and tools lost in moments that are both sudden and inevitable. You notice the quiet resilience in their faces, the understated resolve to recover what they can and move forward, despite the setbacks. Illness, too, tightens its grip. Cholera and dysentery spread silently, carried in water, food, or simple human proximity. You observe parents tending to feverish children, guides helping the weak to their feet, neighbors offering herbs and comfort. Every day brings new risks, and the shadow of death, though often quiet, lingers over the camp. You can almost feel the tension, the small sighs, the whispered hopes that the sick will recover, yet the trail is indifferent. Food scarcity becomes a pressing concern. Oxen require feeding, children demand nourishment, and provisions are consumed faster than anticipated. You watch settlers ration carefully, sometimes too stringently, improvising with wild berries, fish from rivers, or even less palatable sources. There is a quiet dignity in their efforts, yet the struggle leaves its mark, gaunt faces, tired eyes, and the subtle weariness of bodies pushed to their limits. Weather, as ever, is a constant adversary. Heat, rain, wind, and even early snow challenge every aspect of life on the trail. Dust chokes the eyes and lungs, mud slows progress, and sudden storms drench clothing and supplies. Nights bring frost that seeps into tents and blankets, making even rest uncomfortable. You feel the chill yourself, imagining the quiet despair of families who awaken shivering, yet must continue onward, because the trail waits for no one. Mortality, once an abstract concept, now becomes tangible. Children, weakened by illness or exhaustion, fall behind. Adults succumb to disease or accidents. You witness quiet funerals by the roadside, simple shovels digging graves in soil softened by rain, a stark, sobering reminder that ambition and hope cannot fully protect against the trail's demands. And yet, life persists. Surviving families continue onward, driven by necessity, hope, and the faint, stubborn belief that the end, Oregon, will be worth the cost. Psychological strain is ever present. Days blend into weeks, weeks into months, the monotony, punctuated by struggle, tests patience and resolve. Families bicker quietly over decisions, which fork to take, when to rest, how to ration food. Tensions rise subtly, often resolved by diplomacy, compromise, or silent endurance. You notice how small victories, crossing a river safely, repairing a wagon, reaching a familiar landmark, offer profound relief, fleeting moments of triumph in an otherwise relentless journey. Interactions with Native Americans, while sometimes helpful, can carry new tensions. A guide's advice may conflict with a settler's instinct, or a misunderstanding may provoke brief anxiety. You see families navigating these encounters with a careful balance of respect, caution, and diplomacy, a gentle reminder that survival depends not only on strength or supplies, but on awareness, humility, and attentiveness. Every mile is a negotiation with nature, with circumstance, and with human limitations. Oxen tire, children grow restless, wagons break, and supplies dwindle. Yet travelers continue, propelled by hope and necessity, a quiet determination that defines the Oregon Trail experience. And you, walking alongside them in imagination, sense both admiration and unease, admiration for their resilience, unease at the relentless challenges they face. By now, you begin to perceive patterns. The trail is patient, but unyielding. Small errors compound into significant setbacks. Choices that seemed minor, crossing a stream at a particular point, resting one day too long, rationing food strictly, can have cascading consequences. And still, families press onward, guided by a fragile optimism that the end of the trail, the fertile valleys of Oregon, will justify every hardship endured along the way. As evening falls, the settlements of temporary campfires glow against the fading light. Families prepare modest meals, tend to livestock, check supplies, and offer comfort to one another. Children rest, some coughing softly, some playing quietly near the fire. The oxen huddle together, tired but steadfast. You feel the quiet rhythm of this life, the subtle ebb and flow of hope and anxiety, a delicate balance between endurance and despair, and you sense the profound lesson of the Oregon Trail, that ambition and optimism, however noble, meet with limits imposed by terrain, weather, and human frailty. And so, as night envelopes the prairie and mountains, as stars will overhead with indifferent grace, you are left with the understanding that the trail is neither cruel nor capricious, merely patient, exacting, and ever demanding. Each step, each decision, each minor triumph or failure contributes to a larger story of human endurance, folly, and resilience. And in this quiet reflection, you come to see why the Oregon Trail, though legendary, was perhaps not the wisest course to pursue, despite the dreams that propelled so many forward. As you and the settlers near the end of the trail, the Willamette Valley emerges, a fertile stretch of land that promises reward for months of hardship, yet the journey's toll is visible in every weary face, in the slow steps of tired oxen, in the silent sighs of those who have endured loss. You sense the relief mingled with quiet sorrow, for though land awaits, not every family arrives intact, and not every dream is fully realized. The Oregon Trail, in retrospect, appears both romantic and relentlessly unforgiving. You imagine letters sent home, recounting the difficulties faced, rivers crossed at great risk, mountains climbed with aching limbs, children falling ill, supplies lost, friendships tested, and hearts weighed down by the small tragedies of the road. Yet, within these accounts, there is also humor, gentle, wry, understated, a recognition of human stubbornness and the peculiar pride of surviving against formidable odds. Families settle in Oregon, and life begins anew. You can almost hear the quiet laughter of children exploring wide fields, the soft clatter of wagons unloading tools and provisions, and the distant murmur of neighbors greeting one another. Yet, the lessons of the trail linger. Patience, resilience, ingenuity, and the importance of community are etched into the daily routines. Parents, reflecting on the months of travel, recognize that survival depended as much on cooperation and adaptability as on planning and skill. The trail's legacy is more than just personal stories. It shaped the growth of the American West, forging connections between distant settlements, spreading knowledge of geography and resources, and even influencing government policies regarding migration and land distribution. You might consider the irony that a path once considered a daring adventure or even folly became an essential artery of expansion, a lesson that human ambition, though imperfect, can leave lasting marks on history. Yet, the Oregon Trail also serves as a gentle cautionary tale. It reminds us that dreams, no matter how inspiring, carry risks that must be respected. The hardships endured were not mere inconveniences, they were real challenges, testing physical endurance, emotional strength, and the bonds of family and community. And you, reflecting quietly on these stories, sense the delicate balance between aspiration and prudence, between hope and realism, a balance as relevant today as it was nearly 2 centuries ago. Consider the small, everyday victories along the trail, a river crossed without loss, a wagon repaired successfully, a child's laughter despite fatigue. These moments, though modest, carry profound meaning. They remind us that human resilience is often measured not by grand achievements alone, but by the quiet persistence, adaptability, and determination that sustain us through prolonged hardship. And as the settlers begin to cultivate their new homesteads, planting crops, building homes, and establishing communities, the trail's influence continues, in their skills, in their stories, and in the gentle wisdom gained through adversity. You feel the subtle poignancy in imagining these families, now finally at rest, looking back along the long path they traversed, and forward to lives shaped forever by experience, challenge, and the relentless pursuit of hope. The Oregon Trail's narrative, gentle listener, is not just about geography or migration. It is about the human spirit, its courage, folly, endurance, and ingenuity. It is about the delicate interplay of ambition and circumstance, and about how individuals navigate an indifferent world with quiet determination. And though the trail was arduous, and in hindsight perhaps not the wisest of choices, it became a testament to the tenacity and resilience of those who dared to undertake it. As you close your eyes and imagine the final stretch of the trail, the soft wind across the prairie, the distant mountains fading into memory, and the quiet settlements emerging in the distance, let the story linger. Feel the rhythm of wheels on dirt, oxen's lowing, and the soft murmur of families at rest, a gentle reminder of both the fragility and strength inherent in human endeavor. And so, we conclude our journey along the Oregon Trail, not with dramatic flourish, but with quiet reflection. It is a story of dreams, trials, endurance, and, ultimately, human resilience. As night falls over the prairie, and stars wheel overhead in their timeless dance, let the echoes of wagons, laughter, and whispered prayers settle in your mind, leaving a gentle imprint of history, softly reminding us of the courage, hope, and humanity of those who once dared to traverse this remarkable, challenging path.